And let me welcome our next speaker, Lucila Dotto. She's a Europe chapter engagement manager at PMI. She leads the team that connects, enables, and empowers the 46 PMI chapter in Europe. Psychologist with a diploma in coaching from Cambridge University, subject matter expert in culture transformation, leadership development, and behavioral change management. Prior to joining PMI, she worked for KPMG, one of the big fours, and also had her boutique in culture, leadership, and behavior change. Interesting fact, she wrote a book in Spanish, which translates as "Have the Courage to Be Yourself." Lucila, the floor is all yours. I'm stopping sharing the screen.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. And thank you for having me, and thank you for being part of this conference. I want to start by saying thank you to the organizer, to Oliver Lekman, to all the Ukraine chapter members, Stefania, Irina, Daria. I think this is a great example of the power of the community. And a showcase that together we can make a difference. Today we are going to be speaking about change, and change also starts with us, with each of us, and how we can contribute and want to make a positive impact in the world. So being here today is showcasing that we want to change the world for the good. And thank you so much for the organizer. Thank you so much for the people that are part today. I'm going to start sharing my screen and my slides. If you have comments, please feel free. Obviously, we have some time allocated at the very end, and I have some opportunities to engage the audience. And again, thank you. Thank you for being here today and wanting to contribute and make an impact. So allow me to share my screen so I can walk you through what I prepare for us today. Can you see my slides? Not yet, no? Can you see it?
Yeah. We see it.
Perfect. Again, so we're going to be speaking about how to handle change from a behavioral perspective. As Daria was saying, I'm a psychologist by background, so bringing my psychological mindset to the floor. And we're going to divide this journey in 3 different stages. So we're going to start by speaking a little bit about the macro and the organizational perspective of change. Then connecting to the interpersonal, how we connect with others, how we lead teams, how we manage projects, also how we connect with others in our personal life. And the third part, but also it's an invitation throughout the presentation, it's to connect with our intrapersonal perspective. As I said, we need to be the change we want to be and we want to see in the world. So having that dialogue between ourselves and being mindful that change starts with us, it's really important. We will keep it for the end, but I invite you to have that mindset throughout the entire presentation. So let me move slides and let me know if you can see the changes of slides. Can you see? Yes, it's changing. Mm-hmm. So how to handle change from a macro and organizational perspective. Obviously, you are familiar with the term VUCA, and we know that we live in an environment that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we have been facing many changes, obviously the pandemic, we are aware of climate change, we face a war in Europe, and our Ukraine chapter, it's mindful and it's doing something positive like about all these situations. So we are really mindful that change is something that we're going to constantly be facing, and it's the only thing that wouldn't change. So our ability and the ability of organizations and projects to cope change, it's front and center of everything that we do, because we live in constant change. And previously, organizations used a lot the word business as usual. And when they face a change program or a transformation program, they always say, well, we need to come to business as usual. Now the usual thing is transformation. We are living in a world where transformation is the usual part of how we do business, how we lead projects, how we organize ourselves. So we need to reframe this change fatigue, this change resilience, and be able to adapt and to be resilient. So the most important thing that organizations need to cultivate is change resilience, and also from a project management perspective. And resilience is a term that we always like or mostly discuss at an individual level, but a lot of research showcase that healthy organizations, resilient organizations, were better able to cope, for example, with the times of COVID, and they were less likely to go to bankrupt, and they experienced better shareholder return. So that resilience component of organizations that, for example, can be showcased in the ability to share knowledge, the ability to have performance review, the ability to promote bottom-up innovation, the ability to learn from mistakes is something that helps organizations, that helps projects to stay strong during difficult times. Resilience overall, it's the ability to be agile, to be able to find opportunities in challenges, and to be committed to keep improving, as PMI has one of the values, aiming higher, using every opportunity to learn, sharing those moments of failure, those moments of mistake, to take those considerations into an opportunity to adapt and to keep evolving. So again, transformation as usual and resilience as the core thing that organizations need to cultivate during transformation periods. This is a famous quote that most of us probably know. Culture is strategy for breakfast, and culture is the emotional part of organizations, the emotional part of projects. And it's one of the fundamental parts of making projects and making organization be successful. And there are a lot of research, I pick one from McKinsey, that says that mainly when a company, when a program, when a project fails, a lot has to do with employees' behavior and management behavior, because that possibility to cultivate the power skills, the motivation, the engagement, it's one of the key success factors of transformation process. So culture and the emotional component of projects, of organizations, it's fundamental part of how we handle change. And it's what we are going to be discussing throughout this time together today. Really important to be aware that our operating system, it's organized like an iceberg. What we see, the behavior we see in organizations, in people, in others, in ourselves, it's just a small part of what is driving that behavior. That is the subconscious part that is driving that behavior. So again, when addressing transformation, when addressing projects, it's really important to have that mindset of identifying the culture, identifying the behaviors, but being aware that those behaviors are only the 80 and 90%. And it's really important to deep dive in what's sustaining and maintaining those behaviors. So I have been speaking for a couple of minutes now, and I want to invite you to take your phones and go to www.menti.com and put the code on screen, because I would like to listen or to identify what are the key emotions, the key words that you associate with change before we keep deep diving in these terms. So if you join me to go to Menti and use the code 533-49916, and I will invite you to type the emotions or the words that you associate with change. It could be change at personal level, organizational level, macro level. What are the emotions, the words that you associate with change? And I can see some responses coming. I'm going to share those. Interesting responses, allowing a couple of more minutes. Okay, like you can continue, but being mindful of time, I will start sharing. And if you have more to add, you can add and comment there. So let me go to Menti. Probably you can see. Can you see the Menti? No, the Menti screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Daria. So we can see some components in here, like excitement, fear, uncertainty, resistance, opportunity, embrace, happy, overcome, headache, nervousness, fear, refresh, uncomfortable, cautious, stress, worry, concern, job security, exhaustion, discovery. Well, thank you so much for inputting here. This is great insight. Let me continue with the presentation now, but I would like second presenting. Perfect. Share my screen, desktop sharing. Perfect. And perfect. So as you can see in the Menti, there are a lot of emotions, different reactions, and they are different from person to person. But the key message is that there are not organizations that change. It's the people within the organizations that change. You know, like programs, projects, organizations are formed by people. So ultimately, those emotions, those responses that we associate with change are the ones that drive transformations in organizations, in programs, in projects. So that people component of organizations and projects is what we are going to continue discussing today. So we spoke a little bit about that macro approach to change, the VUCA environment, the cultural component that is the emotional life of organizations. And we realized that organizations are formed by people. So ultimately, we need to address that personal, that interpersonal component on how to handle change. So let me go to the second part of our conversation today. So change can cause a roller coaster of responses and emotion. And as you can see in the Menti, like change is highly personal. So some people showcase that change was associated to fear, others to excitement. So it's really important to understand the psychology of change, because change ultimately is highly personal and each person can live it in a different way. So we tend to use, or I tend to use a lot, the change curve when expressing and explaining change to leadership, because it's a visual representation and it showcases that you can face different emotions in the same change process. And this model is inspired in an author, a psychiatric, that is Kubler-Ross, that she studied the grief model. So when people are in a process of grief, they navigate different emotions. They have a stage that it's about denial, and they start feeling perhaps some angerness. And then slowly, then you start accepting that change and navigating that curve and being positive again. These stages are not one after the other. It's super personal. So different people can navigate and go through the different stages in a different way. But overall, the message is that when navigating change, we feel different responses, different emotional responses. Sometimes we can start by feeling super happy and excited about change. And at the second moment, you start feeling fear, anxiety, denial. So it's really important to be aware that you will experience a diversity of emotions, and that emotions are really different from people to people. So for example, when leading a team, it's really important to be mindful that the different people could be at different stages of our roller coaster, and we need to be able to adapt and to be flexible and to be resilient in order to support and equip our different employees in how they handle and navigate change. Ultimately, change is highly personal, and emotion is really key in order to address and help people to cope with change. As human beings, our brain is wired following two main principles. We are wired to connect with others and to experience that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of something bigger than us. For example, that's the reason we are really keen to be part of a community, because we are wired to connect. And also, we are wired to protect. We want to be safe from a physical and from a psychological point of view. These are the two main principles that organize our brain. We are wired to connect and to be loved, to be cared, to be respected, and we're wired to be protected, safe, and happy and healthy. Our brain wants to minimize danger and maximize reward. And why this is important? Because when we approach change, when we communicate change, it's important to be mindful that most of the people will treat change as danger. So if you feel that you are in danger, ultimately you are resistant to that danger and you are not able to cope and to adapt and to be excited, because you perceive that danger, that change associated as a potential risk. And why this is important? Because when we, for example, draft communications, when we engage our teams, we need to be mindful that our people potentially could resist change because they perceive it as a danger. So we need to provide a supportive environment. We need to provide psychological safety in order to people to be able to adapt. We need to help our people, our teams, to minimize that danger, that potential risk of change, and maximize reward. Human beings tend to change when they see that the benefit of changing is bigger than the benefit of not changing. The problem is sometimes it's like you are like in a kind of path of doing things, and you associate that this new change, externally, internally proposed by the organization as the pandemic, that was a big change for us all. It's a big risk that it's a threat to this ability and that need that we have of protecting ourselves. If we go and deep dive a little bit about how our brains are formed, we have different stages of evolution of our human brain. The first part is the reptilian brain, that is more automatic, that regulates, for example, the body pleasure, the temperature. And for example, it's the type of brain that triggers our reaction of fight, flight, or freeze. So when animals feel that something is, it's a kind of like fear, it's a threat, then they kind of adopt this reptilian brain and they fight or fly. Then we have the second evolution of the brain, that is the limbic brain, that is associated to emotions, that element of expressing care, taking care of others. And both brains are super connected. So for example, when we feel that something is a danger that is threatening us, sometimes our blood pressure is different, our hearts start beating in a different way. So they are super connected. And these reactions that are much more on the animal part, also we can bring it to organizations, because when we are stressed, we have the same reactions. Our blood pressure changes, our hearts start beating in a different way, because ultimately we are feeling threatened, as animals are feeling threatened in nature in general. And then we have the most evolved part of the brain, that is the neuroport. It's the rational brain, the thinking brain. And that aspect of our brain is the newest part. It's the most developed part of the brain. It's the one that helps us to self-reflect. It's the part of the brain that helps us plan, project, go through the future. And it's the one that helps us to acknowledge and observe what is happening in the other part of the brain, in the much more reptilian part or the limbic part. And it's the one that helps us to not to react to situations, but to respond, to introduce that rational component on how we will handle change. If we were animals, we should only be reacting to change, like protecting ourselves to brain. While we are human beings, our first and natural reaction could be to protect and to defend that change and to resist that change. But as soon as we introduce that rational, that thinking part, we can embrace change and take it as an opportunity to learn, to explore, to continue growing as an individual level, and as a project level, and as an organizational level. I know that I'm giving a lot of concepts and content, and I know that we have our questions at the end, but if somehow at some point you want to use the chat, I can include any comment into my notes and my comments. So I mentioned that when we receive a stimulus, could be a change program in an organization, could be a new project that we need to face and navigate. We respond, we react. And I put an arrow there because in that arrow, it's where our freedom, our ability to respond to this stimulus in a productive way. So reactivity isn't wrong. It's only part of our primal nature. But we need our loving presence, our compassionate presence, our empathic presence to be able to cope and to manage that stimulus in a positive and productive way. If we only react to circumstances, we are just engaging our reptilian brain, our limbic brain, but we are not acting as a rational human being. We need to be able to respond rather than react. And that response is involving that presence, that possibility to take change as an opportunity to learn, as to grow as a human being, and also as a team, as a leader of the team. So if we reflect about how we can empower change from a leadership perspective, we have been discussing about that macro view, that VUCA environment, where we face change as something at our environment that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We say that it's really important when addressing organizational transformation to understand the culture, the emotional life of the organization, and to be able to understand that the behaviors that we observe in projects, in organizations, not necessarily are the full picture, but the upper part of that iceberg that we were discussing. Then we also go through the journey of understanding that navigating change can cause this roller coaster of emotions, and that emotions are highly personal, and every person, every employee, every person that we need to manage in a project can navigate this roller coaster in a different way and experience emotions in a different way, or could be at different stages of this curve. So that's important to be flexible, to be able to be compassionate and adapt to what people are feeling. And what we can do from a kind of a leadership perspective. And leadership, I don't mean as necessarily a position. You can be the leader of the project and have people that report into you. But I want to bring the concept that everyone is a leader. Leader is the possibility to action change. It's this ability to make ideas a reality. It's this possibility to really be action-oriented. So ultimately, each project manager is a leader because you are empowering others, you are making things happen. And this is like the ability to be a leader. Leader, it's about action, it's about influence, and it's about making things happen. I want to recommend, if you're interested in developing your leadership style, your leadership skills, this book from Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. It has a lot of like really, really nice and powerful insights. And what she says in this book, and you can also like go through TED Talks and presentations, she's really inspirational, she's really engaging. She put at the heart two main concepts when speaking about leadership. One is courage. One of the key behaviors for being able to lead a team and to make things happen and to help people navigate change is being courageous, because leadership is about having the possibility to be brave at work and to be able to handle difficult and tough conversations with your whole heart. Leadership, it's not necessarily about doing like the nice things. It's about showing courage when like difficult times happen. It's being able to stand up and take the difficult conversations, the difficult words. And sometimes people with the intention of being nice are struggling to have that tough conversations. But leadership, it's about like saying the truth with kind. And sometimes that truth is difficult to say. So courage is one of the biggest and the most important behaviors that leaders and project managers needs to showcase when navigating change. It's about being brave. It's about having that tough conversations. It's about being vulnerable about their own mistakes and using those as an opportunity to learn. So I highly recommend this book from Brené Brown, because it gives a lot of tips and a lot of ideas about how you can live courageously and lead teams courageously. A second element about being a good leader, it's not only about being courageous, but having and developing a coaching and listening mindset. These pictures showcase big ears, and in fact, we have 2 ears and just one mouth, because being able to listen is more important than necessarily speaking when you have to approach communication. And another nice book, if you're interested in leadership development, it's called Purpose, and it's about developing purpose-led leaders. One of the chapters that I put here, some insights, it's about listening skills. And one of the skills that this chapter proposes, it's about when communicating with your team, when communicating it in a project, it's really important to adopt a listening mindset. And that listening mindset involves an open body language. It involves being really focused in our attention, involves relaxed concentration, really being and developing your presence. Another important aspect that I would like to highlight is the power of questions. When you want people to change, rather than giving a certain message, it's more powerful to ask questions, because questions can trigger different connections in our brain. So like if you want to frame a message, rather than give it in a certain way, ask a question, ask a powerful question that allows that person to continue thinking and reflecting. Having this mindset of curiosity and being compassionate, trying to listen. Sometimes when we are speaking with someone, we are just thinking, what are we going to reply? What are we going to respond to that person? Rather than to be present and curious about what that person is telling us. And that compassionate angle, it's really important in order to connect. And again, because we have different mindsets, and some people can be understanding things in a different way as we are, it's really important that when we are listening, perhaps we summarize what we listen and to check our understanding, to check misalignment or alignment between what we are saying and what the other person understood, or the opposite way around, like what the other person was telling us and what we understood. Overall, as you can see on screen, the power of being present, of being relaxed, of being really curious about what the other person is saying, it's one of the key things in helping us to connect with other people. It's one of the key things in helping our people to navigate change, rather than necessarily kind of like giving all the message and overwhelming people and making them resist change because they experience as a threat, as we were saying, that we are wired to protect and wired to connect. If they feel that they are we are affecting that element of security, of safety, they will resist change and they will protect to change. Whereas if we ask questions and we engage them and we listen to their ideas and we ask how they are feeling, this is the possibility of really connect and to be able to cope with change in a different way. So summarizing a little bit what we have been saying from a leadership perspective, from this ability to dare to lead, courage gives us a voice. It's the ability for us to deliver the difficult messages, is the ability to deliver challenging work and speak the truth with kind. And compassion, empathy, give us an ear. So these are key components in communication. Sometimes perhaps we are more close to be super compassionate, super empathic, but we struggle when we need to deliver difficult message. And sometimes the opposite. Some people are more harder in the communication style, more courageous. They are kind of like more prepared to deliver the challenging, the challenging messages. But both courage and compassion are the cornerstone, the pillars of being a good leader, a good people manager, because you can speak the truth with kind and you can help other people to really open up, and rather than resisting change, to be able to navigate change and to bring that human to human connection that is really important and is really central in behavior change. So we have been speaking about organizations and the culture aspect and the behavioral component. We have been speaking about leadership style and how we handle change and that component of being both courageous and compassionate as a leader and helping people to open up, because we provide a smooth environment that allows them or empowers them, rather than resisting change, to be able to open up because they feel that component of psychological safety. But I also want to highlight that change is also starting from us, that intrapersonal perspective that we welcome at the very beginning, because like there is an invitation of being the change we want to see in the world. I started my intro today saying that I really appreciate you being here today. I really appreciate the work of Oliver and the Ukraine chapter in terms of role modeling the change we want to see in the world. So obviously macro change is happening. From a leadership perspective, we need to be courageous and compassionate to help others navigate change, but also we need to manage ourselves, because ultimately, our work, our personal relationships, our projects are shaped by who we are. So the component of managing ourselves and how we handle change from an intrapersonal level, it's one of the key components that impact the different areas of our life. Probably you heard about Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl survived the concentration camps in Germany, and he developed a theory that is called logosophy. And what he was saying is that he discovered, and he was obviously really frustrated in that kind of like situation, but he discovered that the only thing he can control was his attitude to navigate one of the most difficult situations that people can be experiencing, that was that being in a concentration camp. And he discovered that attitude and how he positioned himself and how he helped others to cope with that difficult situation. It's the ultimately freedom of people. Because when we are no longer able to change a situation, we're always challenged to change ourselves. So he put a lot of emphasis on developing his attitude and using that time that was super difficult to motivate others, to help others navigate that difficult situation. And he found purpose in that. And he developed his theory saying that between the stimulus, between a difficult situation and our response to that difficult situation. There you can find your freedom to react or to freedom to respond, the freedom of being positive and kind when you face challenging situations, or complaining and being like stuck in that complaint. So Viktor Frankl like proposed this model, and I think this is something really inspirational that I would like to bring with us all today. I have been saying like the importance of developing ourselves, be positive ourselves, but it's really hard to be ourselves and to be the very best version of ourselves if we don't really know ourselves. So it's really important to start by taking time to reflect on who we are and what are the areas that we would like to develop of ourselves, but also to be able to celebrate the strengths that we have in our life and the positive things that we do, the good projects that we manage, the good outcomes. Sometimes as human beings, we tend to be more recognizing or more welcoming of the work of other people rather than ourselves. And we are our worst enemy because we put high standards, high pressure in ourselves and are harder than the ones that we put into others. So that component of taking time to acknowledge who we are, like being able to identify what we want to achieve and be able to reward ourselves, it's really, really important. In change, it's really difficult to have big change at once. That's the kind of like the explanation of why New Year resolutions fail. It's because we tend to put like big changes in our agendas, and it's impossible to have big changes. In behavior change, you notice that it's incremental changes. So small changes, small milestones, what creates a sustained behavior change. So rather than putting big milestones, start with small milestones that we can continuously repeating and building that routine, that reminder that allow us to change. And the second component, first we said routine, repetition, small changes, small milestones. The second one is the reward component. Be able also to be acknowledging the positive, rewarding yourself in order to introduce that positive behavior. Sometimes, and in different cultures, I'm London-based, and in London I see it a lot when I speak with friends. We tend to compete who is the busiest one, because sometimes like people showcase like, oh, I'm super busy, and it's important to take a step back and say, well, it's being busy for the purpose of being busy, or where it's that I'm making the biggest impact, and tend to prioritize those actions, to allocate some time of my agenda in order to reflect, in order to connect. Because in the end, we are human beings, we are not human doings. And we put a lot of effort and emphasis on the things that we need to do, but sometimes that is detrimental of taking time to develop ourselves, to cultivate our human being. And that can be done, I don't know, practicing yoga. I love practicing yoga to kind of like cultivate my presence and protect my energy. You can do it through sports, running, can do it through meditation, can do it by allocating some time to reflect on your week and what are the behaviors and the values that you want to bring front and center to your agenda. We have been speaking about giving courageous messages and providing feedback with compassionate and kind when being a leader. But it's also really important to ask for feedback, because that ask of like receiving feedback, it's what helps us to correct our self-understanding. So, for example, I will give you an example to start closing the presentation. That element of acknowledging and assessing ourselves, it's really important. So I create this kind of like framework, considering the 4 power skills from PMI annual survey. PMI always does an annual survey. And last year's annual survey, the 4th most important power skills were communication, strategic thinking, collaborative leadership, and problem solving. The 4th most important power skills that project managers identify as key for project success. So what I decided to do is map my perception. So how I think I'm performing in those 4 power skills. So to assess myself, and then next year or next 6 months, I will do the same. So I tend to be quite positive. So I punctuate myself, and then I give the same matrix to one of the people that report into me. So I'm going to move slide, bear with me. So this was my perception. And then I ask a direct report to complete this assessment. So I was able to map and identify what I was doing. So for example, I was really positive surprised as they see me better, for example, in problem solving. So a good opportunity for me to acknowledge and to celebrate how I'm delivering at that front. But I noticed that, for example, in strategic thinking, she perceived me less than what I was thinking about myself. So that could give me a possibility to develop an action plan for my next couple of months. Or if I think I'm really good at strategy thinking, perhaps it's a matter of communicating the strategy because she was not noticing what I was thinking. So this is an example, but it's important to highlight the power of giving and receiving feedback. Giving feedback to your employees with courage and compassion, as we said, in order to help them to navigate change, in order to help them transform and be a better version, but also being vulnerable enough to ask for feedback, because feedback will help us to correct our mindset, what we think about ourselves and what other people think of ourselves, and also to build an action plan for the upcoming months in order to develop our leadership style. Okay, so we are almost in time for Q&A, but before we close the presentation, and I know that I have been like providing a lot of content from organizational perspective, from kind of like how to be a leader and dare to lead and lead with purpose. But I would like to be action-oriented. We are a project management community that take action and make things happen. So I will invite you again to go to menti.com using the same code 533499916. And it would be nice to have an action-oriented. So with the things that we have been discussing today, what is one thing that we will start or stop or continue doing to be able to handle and navigate change? Could be from an organizational perspective, could be in your team, in your project, personal. So it's putting some action to the things that we have been discussing. So if we go again to Menti.
Can you share the number again, please?
Yes, of course. 1 second. Let me. 1 second, Daria. Share. So it's going to menti.com and the code is 533499916. And it's like a commitment, could be big or small. I recommend, since we have been speaking about change, that small commitments repeated in period of time and building that routine is what makes change. If we put big commitments, sometimes it's like New Year resolutions that tend to fail. So it's better to have small chunks, small milestones that you repeat and you build that routine and you celebrate from a behavioral change perspective in order to promote that behavior change. Could be things that you would like to start doing, things that you would like to stop doing, or things that you would like to continue doing.
Maybe that's something on my side, because I can see the previous question. What are the key emotions that you associate with change?
Okay, let me move. Perhaps it's something on the technology. No, you can see it now.
Yeah, I do.
Let me try it through myself as well. No, I think it's not going. It's, well, Can you see, Daria, like the question or not yet?
Yeah, I can see the button open questions and answers, and the question,
Okay.
let's be action oriented. What is your commitment?
Okay, perfect.
Participants are asking about the code to access again.
Yes, of course, I will share again a screen. 1 second.
I've put the code in the Zoom chat. You
Mm-hmm.
can copy paste it.
I'm going to, while people are completing, to start reading some of the responses we have. Know myself more and identify what I want to achieve. Yes, that's really important to acknowledge like where we are and where what we want to be to bridge that gap. We have asked for feedback. Yes, sometimes we are much more familiarized and especially in leadership roles to give feedback rather than to ask. But I think one of the most inspirational bosses that I have always finished a meeting asking how I did. Do you have any feedback for me? And he was super senior, but equally he was asking feedback from all employees. And that was a great opportunity for him to keep evolving, but also for us to feel engaged, listen, and take it into consideration. How does one approach the project of being architect of our own career? Wow, this is a really insightful. Exactly. This is like we are builders and project managers of our career, of our journey. We have another about giving more feedback, and that's something that we have been discussing. Who do I collect feedback from others? Any template I can use. So obviously you can like think about like open-ended questions. I can share templates if you like. We can connect then on LinkedIn and I can share. You can also have this regular kind of like possibility to ask one-to-one feedback and not necessarily on a template, but in a conversation, but definitely I can share templates. And then what else? And then we have another comment about scheduling more one-to-one with team. So in order to promote that kind of engagement. I'm conscious that we are on time for further questions, so I'm going to stop sharing. But the idea is also to close with some commitments and how we can bring this into action in our daily work and in our daily projects. So I don't know, Daria, if we have questions. I think we are like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna share the screen with a QR code for Slido. So now we have opened the floor for the questions. You can access Slido and submit your questions. We have one question so far. So if you have to define steps on how organizations, leaders, PMs should address change, what those steps would look like?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Daria, for the question. So normally when you think from an organizational perspective, the first stage is to have that leadership alignment. So in order to build that kind of narrative of change, so I would say that the first stage is having leadership alignment and making clear what is that you want to communicate. So what are kind of like the the skeleton of the communication. So that's first, make it super clear and have that leadership buy-in. The second stage is the communication aspect. As we said, change can create that sense of fear, of anxiety. So communications should be drafted and built in order to prevent that that component of resistance to change, so communications, but also not kind of like one-way communication, but enabling spaces to give feedback, to ask questions, to be really included in the communication. So first one is clear and leadership, second communication. Then the third stage would be about embedding that change and making change happen. And it's really important to identify what that change means for people in the different roles. Sometimes when leaders communicate that change, they only keep it high level, but they don't consider necessarily what that change means for the different roles. So really embedding and making it real for your role, it's super important. And the last one that I think it's the most difficult one is how we make change sustainable, how we make that change stick. Organizations sometimes fail because they struggle to make that change stick in time. So that element of sustainability of change is really important. And you sustain change if you promote micro change rather than big change at once. So that element of building a routine, a reminder, repetition, it's really important for behavior change. And also the other R, that is reward and the recognition. So in order to promote change, that change should be part, for example, of the recognition process, of the reward process, of the feedback process. So in summary, clarity of the narrative and leadership involvement, communications, communicate, gives people as the possibility to ask questions, make it real for them, embed it into processes, into their daily practices, and make it stick through building a routine and rewarding and keep it part of the regular processes. So that would be kind of like my steps.
Thank you so much. So no questions so far.
Okay.
Yep. So we have 8 minutes to the next speaker. So we can make
that's perfect. We can give a break to people, but I would like to say thank you again to the organizers, to the participants, and just want to share quickly the last slide that I have, 1 second, in order to close the presentation. But I think like we have been speaking about change, and the only way that we'll change the world is starting with us and connecting with others and being part of a community. So I want to say thank you. And this is a great example of putting change into action and using like the skills, the power of a community to make a positive impact. So change starts with us. And thank you for being the change we want to see. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, the Crane chapter, and let's stay in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Lucila.
Bye-bye.